Oh, that's you, Bob. No, I didn't know I look so good.
You do. You look amazing. You really do.
Right. You typically do follow-up questions to something said in
If
your
it,
chat?
if it makes sense to. It depends on how it flows.
Is it the one that's unless you give me power to unmute. Okay. I'll just mute. Just mute.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crucial Conversations on Cognitive Diversity. My name's Maria Kennedy, and I am your host today. And I have my amazing guest with me, Mr. Carl Sabatino. But before I tell you a bit about Carl and allow him to share his wealth of knowledge with us, I just want to tell you about some of our housekeeping things. So remember, there are two ways for you to communicate with us. We have the chat, which is a great place for you to put your comments, to respond to anything that's being said, to share any tidbits that you have, any insights that you have from your life. And then we have the Q&A. So that's a separate tab at the bottom. So if you have questions for our guests today, then please put them there. That will be curated by Stephanie Coxham and John Baum. And so they'll answer any questions that are instantly available to them, and then they'll share with Carl and myself your questions so that we can answer them live today. Or if you give your email info, we can message you with your answers later on. So when you logged in, then you were asked to answer a couple of questions on our poll. So let's have a look and see what our answers were. So our first question was, are you a parent of a 2E child? And 67% of you are, so great. Welcome, parents. And then in the second question, it asked, in what capacity do you interact with 2E students? And we all know that there's a whole variety of ways. And so we have teachers, we have parents, we also have some therapists and researchers. So thank you all for joining us today. So without further ado, I think we should get into the meat and veg of today's webcast. So with me on the sofa or in the chair, depending on which one you prefer, is Carl Sabatino, and he is the head of the amazing school called Bridges Academy. And when Carl joined Bridges Academy about 15, 16 years ago now. 16, oh my goodness. And look, he doesn't look a day over 21. So who knows how he managed to lead a school for 16 years. But Carl's really made a great impact, not only in 2E education generally, but most specifically at Bridges Academy. And he's helped them grow to an amazing organization, which I'm sure he's going to share some details with us a little later, but it's really now branched out. So not only training students, but training teachers. We have a grad school program, we have 2E News. And so they're really at the forefront and the cutting edge of 2E education. So without further ado, it is my distinguished pleasure and delight to introduce you to our guest today, Mr. Carl Sabatino.
Well, thank you, Maria, for inviting me to this wonderful occasion, because I was feeling a little left out. You know, as the head of a premier 2E school, I would have thought I would have been the first one you would have interviewed, but I understand there's a lot of amazing people out there doing extraordinary work, and we want to make sure that we showcase all of them. So thank you very much, and I hope that I can be beneficial to our audience and to each other as we learn more about how we can do wonderful things with our twice exceptional students.
Awesome. So let's just kick off, because there may be people with us that don't know anything about Bridges Academy. So could you start by telling us a little bit about the school that you're head of?
Well, the school's origins are very simple. It was a small tutorial in a home, private home, that moved to a dentist's office. And grew and grew and grew from a tutorial to a young school, a new school, and then eventually became what it is today. It started out with 6th grade, we added 5th grade, and we added 4th grade. And then we moved to this particular campus in Studio City, where we eventually were able to purchase the campus, and we're now a faculty and student body of about 200 students and about 100 in faculty. It was an extraordinarily rich curriculum and just phenomenal faculty. So that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So you're right. So it's grown phenomenally. So what would you say were the prongs? What's essential in running a well-rounded, wholesome 2E program?
Well, I think the first thing that we want to take a look at, and this is maybe a bit general, a bit abstract, but at the same time, I think it's critical. We want to take a look at the administrative model. An administrative model simply means, are we the goals of an administrative model are to make sure that it's running smoothly. Are we crossing our I's and dotting our T's, or crossing our T's and dotting our I's? Are we supporting the teachers? Are we taking care of everything that we need to take care of? Now, that's the administrative model, but there's also a financial model. And the financial model simply asks the question, can you afford it? Can we afford everything that we need to do? And there tends to be somewhat conservative when we look at the model. But then we have the educational model. And the educational model is about what is it that would make the best impact, the most impact on the student's education. And sometimes there's a conflict among these models. Sometimes the educational model says we have to have low student-teacher ratio, we have to have certain kinds of specialized spaces. And then you end up with the economic model that says, well, stop that, you can't afford that, you can't do it. And so some schools get into trouble when their models don't overlap and mesh together. Because obviously, if you run into financial difficulty, your school's going to close. But if you don't have the right educational model that the kids need, you're not going to do it right by them. You're not going to do a good job, and it's not going to be appropriate for the kids. So we want to make sure that happens. So that's a big picture structural look at Bridges Academy and just really any school. Going a little bit narrower than that, it's really about the diversity of enrichment and opportunities. There need to be courses of many different types, many different interests. There need to be courses we call them enrichment clusters. We have electives, we have intersessions, we have many different ways of delivering or allowing our students to access education. That's extremely important. The richer it is, the more varied opportunities they have, the way we deliver it presents a different kind of experience for the child. So when the child is in one experience, they're going to be in charge of the curriculum. When the students are in another experience, well, then it's going to be the instructor that is more or less in charge. But you want to create a variety of experiences, enrichment as much as you possibly can, because we have so many different types of students. We have so many students with so many different interests. We need to be able to create what might be called a smorgasbord and let the kids just fill themselves and gorge themselves on whatever is their passion for the moment.
Ooh, I like that.
And we need to make sure we watch, we observe, and we learn what's putting the light in their eyes, what's exciting them, they're enjoying. And then we can learn a little bit more about them and do better by them with the curriculum. So the models, the business model, the educational model, the administrative model, the enrichment of all these types of programs are a big part of it. There are others. We could write a book, and if we have a few hours, I'd be happy just to kick back and we could talk about all of the wonderful pieces and elements that go into creating a Bridges Academy or any successful school. That's sort of it in a bridged form.
I like it. Bridged and bridges. Cool. Could you give us a little insight into, the intersection between cognitive development and social emotional development? Because we know that a lot of 2E students suffer or struggle, struggle often with social emotional development. So how at Bridges is that addressed? How do we marry those two things?
I think we need to understand that they're both separate and they are related. We do have to always be working at the highest cognitive level that the children can take part in. There's a concept called zone of proximal development, where we try to understand where is the child operating cognitively, and that may be generally or it may be in a particular subject. And we want to make sure that it's not so easy that they're not learning anything, nor so difficult that they're going to give up. Well, cognitive development is extremely important. The zone of proximal development is where we want to be. But in the social emotional world, they also have a zone of proximal development. They're also at a certain place in their development, whatever their age. Sometimes it is age related, but sometimes it's really not quite tied to age. It's their own developmental pathway, and we have to honor that. So we are honoring where they are intellectually by adjusting curriculum, dual differentiating curriculum, so that we can make strides in their intellectual development. But at the same time, we're going to be looking at social emotional development and saying, well, where are they there? And we can have a dichotomous relationship. We can have a child who socially and emotionally is operating at a lower level, a younger level, if it were, but intellectually very high, and that's fine. In a 2E environment, we expect that to some degree with some students, and we will work with both. The interesting thing about the intersection is that many of our kids, when students are very bright, it's often the case that we're looking at developing their awareness of the social emotional development through their cognitive abilities. They're not little animals that need to be trained to do things, although training does come into the picture. But it's really, we want them to understand. We want to use their cognitive abilities to understand why it is we want them to behave. The social pragmatics are developed through the intellect, not just through mindless training. We can do that, but these are bright kids. We can talk to them about behaviors. We can talk to them about social norms, societal norms, the norms of the school, and they can eventually do that. But we can also model it as teachers and other people in the environment. We can correct in the moment, and we can have them develop the habits of the kinds of social norms that we expect and the understanding as well. So there is that connection that we use their cognitive ability to help them understand social emotional development and what they need to do and where they are and where they're going. But we're looking at them separately and together.
Nice. So adding on possibly to that dual differentiation, there's an awful lot out there. I mean, when I went to school, I don't want to date myself, but because I look like I'm 21, but I'm actually 23, but don't tell anybody. When I went to school, we used encyclopedias. So encyclopedias were where you got all of your information, all of your content from. But now there is just so much out there on the internet. It's changing possibly almost every second, if not every single day. So how do you determine what should be content? What's really relevant? How do you hone in or bring down? Are we following the standards for the area in which we live, or are we going outside of that to meet the needs of our students?
The question you ask is an interesting one, and it's one that I think we're going to be talking more about in education. It's complex and it's in transition. And when you're in transition, it's always harder to get your head around where we've been, where are we, and where we're going. But when it comes to content, when it comes to curricular content, we really probably have to kick it up to the bigger ideas. Commonly, we all need to deal with notions of justice. Mm-hmm. We need to deal with notions of equality. We need to understand what democracy is. We need to know what civility is. We need to know what truth, beauty, goodness. We should be all commonly dealing with all of those topics. However, the way we can access those topics can vary tremendously. We can access them in mathematics. We can access them in social studies. We can access them through the old canon of literature. Some people might refer to them as the dead white males, but there's some extraordinary work that the dead white males did that is still relevant when you want to explore the big ideas. Right. However, there's a lot of literature or contemporary literature that many kids relate to much more readily that deal with the same issues, right? They're dealing with justice, they're dealing with equality, they're dealing with democracy, beauty, goodness. And so if we can use materials that interest the children, the material is less important than them grappling deeply and complexly with those big ideas. And I think it becomes important. American history, for example, 50 years ago, the US was not as old as it was today. And prior to World War II, there was a lot less history. And since World War II, it's expanded dramatically. Right? How do you do a survey course? If you looked at the curriculum, the survey courses from the 1900s, and looked at the survey course now, well, what do? Do you just keep getting more survey, memorizing certain things at a very general and abstract level so that you really don't pay any attention to detail? You can't. You can't possibly do everything in survey form because students don't learn. And you can't possibly get everything into a curriculum. So you pick and choose those things that are most relevant to the children that are going to access and have them grapple with those big ideas. Once they do that, Once you ask them essential questions, and once you develop the enduring understandings, and that's just, what do you want them to leave with? If they forgot everything else in your class, what one thing could they leave with? Then you're going to develop educated students. And remember that it's not, everyone's fund of knowledge can be slightly different. We don't have to have the exact same information as if we had a file that we both shared in our heads.
Right.
We can have a different fund of information, but what we need to share is ability to communicate with each other about equality or justice or beauty or goodness. We need to be able to have those conversations, even if we come at it from a different perspective.
Nice.
So you can choose data and information for kids that interest them, that piques their attention, if you can bring them to the bigger ideas, because it's the big ideas that we all have in common, but it's the details that are very much dependent on the details of our individual lives. But we can share the big ideas with each other, and I think we need to.
Cool. I really like that. I have been told before that, and have experienced it, that often our children are argumentative. But I guess based on what you're saying, if we're teaching them to be able to give their opinions and maybe to be able to receive others' opinions. So it's a bit of a sharing. So I want to read you something. So I'm going to read it because I'm not going to remember all of this. A professor from Yale, William Derkowitz, so he has a book out called Excellent Sheep. He said that he saw something that troubled him deeply. His students, some of the nation's brightest minds, were adrift when it came to the big questions, just like you were talking about, how to think critically and creatively, and how to find a sense of purpose. Now, he argues that elite colleges are turning out conformists without a compass. So my question is that are 2E students, if they get the right education, are they able to transcend that? Or are they going to be subject to the same thing? So just learning for the sake of learning, but coming out, without that ability to dissect and to truly understand.
I think this goes back to the issue of training, right? There is educational training where I tell you what you need to know, you memorize what you need to know, you make sure that when you are given a test, you tell me that you know that. That would be educational training. Now, there's some benefit to memorizing some data, right? If someone sees a red light, we don't want to have a discussion about what a red light is, right? We want you to just know a red light means stop, so stop. It's not, you want certain facts, certain data that you do want to memorize, and there's no question about that. But we want students to go beyond that. We have heard actually from a lot of employers over the last 10 years that there are a lot of super bright students with amazing resumes that will go into the corporations and they'll get a job. Well, you give them resources and you give them a task. They do not know how to take those resources to complete that task. They can only do what they are told to do and given the mechanisms, the methods, the tools to do that. They don't go out beyond that because they were never asked to. They were never told you there are 10 ways to solve this. Tell me what the 10 are. They said, you will solve it this way, please memorize this solution and go do it this way. That's a very different educational pathway for children. And if they're on that path, you will probably end up with the educated sheep concept being fulfilled. We need to make sure that students are challenged to figure things out. And that may include failure. That may include times when they don't do it, they don't get the answer we want or they want or anyone wants. But through metacognition, through thinking back over what we've done, we can learn from the failures and we can move forward. It's extremely important that we teach them to think critically, to think creatively, to think out of the box, which is particularly easy for a lot of our kids. I mean, because our kids are out of the box thinkers. And so they actually prefer this method. Some students have excellent memories, and that's wonderful. That is always a plus. But we also want to take all students and make sure that they become creative productive, as we often refer to them, rather than necessarily schoolhouse gifted. They can get through school, they can get the A, they're teacher immune. Our kids are not. I had an interesting interaction with a grant funder at one point, and I will not mention the name,
Okay.
although I'd love to, where we applied for a grant and we got a very nice letter saying that we were denied the grant. And we were denied the grant, and this is the language that was used. Well, we've looked at your website and we've looked at your mission, and we're really looking for kids who, with the button-down collars and ties, and you've got to understand that our founder was from that class and from that group. This is the letter I got. I wrote them a letter. I said, thank you very much. We understand your position. And I just want to let you know that I worked in the Manhattan space for 11 years, and I'm very familiar with the button-down collars and the Ivy League and that type of, I said, those are wonderful kids. They deserve the best education they possibly can. And I want them to go into management. I want them to become lawyers. I want them to do all sorts of wonderful things with their careers. I said, but our kids are the ones that are going to develop the projects, going to shift the paradigms, and going to change the world. And I said, I think your foundation should indeed invest in that group as well as the mid-managers that you seem to be investing in.
Right.
And so he wrote another letter back.
Oh, wow.
And said he was very sorry because it was clear that I was obviously offended, that he said he would certainly talk to the board and talk about the issues that I raised. And so I wrote him back. I said, thank you very much. I was definitely offended. And I was very pleased with your letter. And I'd be happy to talk to your board anytime about how they might expand their understanding of what it means to be educated and the impact that these kids have on the world, because that seemed to be where your board is lacking. And I'd be happy to be there. I was never invited. No, they didn't invite me to come and speak. But I do think that people need to understand that becoming educated means something very different than it might have 30, 40 years ago. And it's going to look different. It's going to sound different. And they are going to be able to do different things in a society that is so complex and has so many needs and niches for people to be experts in. And I think that's where our kids come in.
Most definitely. Thank you. So you mentioned failure, and I know for a lot of 2E students, perfectionism is something that they constantly strive for. And I know some of my students have really struggled with not even being prepared to start something if they didn't think it was going to be on the money and totally perfect. So if we're trying to get failure into the curriculum, how do we help our students get through that? What do we say to them? Is there a way of convincing them that failure is okay?
Yeah, but the first thing would probably be to get rid of the word failure.
Okay.
Because it has such a denotation and connotation that we're probably not going to get around that.
Okay.
But we do want to introduce process and to understand that in process, it's trial and error. And trial and error works. We learn from the error. What did we do wrong? If we go and dissect it, if you just move on and get a C on your paper and then you just move on and you get a C for the year and you go to the next grade, there's not a lot of learning from any error that could possibly have come. So unless there's a lot of feedback, unless there's what we call formative evaluation, that's me and you in a classroom. And when something could be better, I suggest, well, have you looked at this? Have you looked at this? Have you tried this? See what happens when you do that. This really is the pits. Try this, giving honest feedback, but formative feedback, and encourage you to continue to do it better without judgment necessarily, without ego, without destroying someone. People need to know it's all the process that human beings go through, and that this is the core of the learning process. We're not giving them permission to fail on everything because, oh yeah, you'll learn if I get an F on this test. We're not talking about that.
Right.
We're talking about going through a trial and error process that can result in learning from that to say, I will do this next time. Most of us that have gotten to a certain age, I won't tell you any of my stories, but I could go back and give you a few things that I have learned from because they didn't work in my personal life and in my education. So we're not going to go there, but I think we all understand that. We need to get kids to understand that,
right.
That it's not the end of the world. What it is an opportunity for you to move forward. That becomes problematic when schools grade based simply on that snapshot of that moment.
Right.
I can remember in elementary schools when they would ask us to take styrofoam and they would say, do a styrofoam model of the universe. I'm not artistic. I didn't know what to do with a styrofoam or the hanger or anything else. So I don't know, mine looked like a universe or it looked like chaos theory. I don't know what it was. And so if I didn't get a good grade on that, well, why? Because my art was bad? Or I understood completely about the solar system and the relationship between the planets and gravity. I got that. I could not express that in that way. So if you were going to give me a grade based on that, it would be problematic. If I'm not a writer and can't express myself in writing and you're giving me a grade on that, that's problematic. So it's not about failures as much as it is about really demonstrating that you can do really well in a particular area. And then if you're not doing as well, then you're going to move on through that process of getting information about your performance, that formative feedback, and doing better. So there are nuances to it. You'd have to explore in different situations, but overall, we just need to desensitize, probably use the word failure less, and desensitize them to this dramatic end of the world because something didn't happen right.
I like that. So we're going to remove failure from our vernacular, and we're now going to start talking about the process. And I think that's really, really important, the process. So where we are in the process and how to improve the process. And I think that leads me on to, so while we're working through that process, then you mentioned the teacher's ability to not take things personally, help the children not put their ego in. So as a head of school, you've obviously had to hire an awful lot of staff in all sorts of departments for all sorts of things. So how do you determine, what are you looking for when you're hiring staff to work with 2E children? What characteristics, what features, what makes them better than anybody else?
Perfection. That's what I'm looking for. 100% perfection. They've got to have it all. Not everyone comes into a school having background in gifted education and LD education and all the neurology that one would need and at different developmental levels. They don't always have that. Some do, fortunate. However, what we're really looking for initially is a human being, if we can go there. Someone who has first of all, is extremely knowledgeable in their field. These teachers need to be knowledgeable in their field because they need to engage the students at the highest possible level. They need to be able to respond to students when they have questions about something and engage them and excite them about the field itself or the topic. Now, sometimes they're not interested in the field, that's fine. But when the child is, that teacher has to be ready to go to engage them in exciting dialogue. That's extremely important. So knowledge of their field, content, education is important. We also need people who are really intuitive, sort of sensitive to the needs of where the kids are. And it's a very, very visceral way. It's a very sort of natural way where you can understand what the child is needing at a given moment and react in that. Some people are skilled at that and others aren't. Some people have lived a life. They've lived long enough and been in enough areas and enough situations that they've learned a lot about human nature. Mm-hmm. They've learned a lot about human personality and temperaments. But we also need teachers who really are not in the field to judge. They're not in the field to pontificate. They're really in the field to just explore a topic with children. And that becomes super important to excite the kids around the material. So we want them to be well educated. We want them to have lived a life and be interesting people. We'd like to have them, the best English teachers I've ever had a background in drama and theater, something else, philosophy, that enriched what their field was. So that can be important. We need people who begin, what we've often seen is, I've heard this a number of times from teachers. I had one teacher that looked at a student one day and said, who couldn't write, by the way, the student could not write well at all. Mm-hmm. And he looked at her and said, "Oh, you're an author." And she looked at him like he was just crazy. Nice. "What do you mean I can't write?" "Well, no, you can't write it down. You can't get it out on paper, but listen to you. You're a storyteller. You have amazing characters that you can talk about. You have amazing settings and the mood and the tone. It's all there. It's hard for you to get it on paper, but it doesn't mean you're not an author. So when you can look at a child and despite all of the challenges and see the potential there and see what they really are, and then you can help bring that out, that is a gift. And I think a lot of our teachers are able to do that. Were they taught that? No, I don't think so. Were they able, did they go to a teaching college and learn how to draw that out? No, I think it is a temperament, a personality type, a worldview, perhaps, that these kids have worth. And a lot of times I think what happens is that when children are having difficulty, teachers stop believing that that child has potential. And the potential, once you believe that a child, oh, this is going to be a difficult child, they're not going to learn, I'll just do whatever I have to do to get through the year, that is a killer mindset. You have to say, wow, I see the challenges, but do you see this author in this? Do you see this engineer here? That is what we're going to develop. This other stuff is in the way. Let's get it out of the way. Let's do what we can. Maybe it's always going to be there. But there's an engineer there. There is an author there. They are very good at identifying their abilities and who these kids are, what they're going to hang their hat on, what they might, have a career based on, and not losing the sight of the child's potential simply because the child happens to be struggling or didn't turn in their homework that night.
Awesome.
So potential, being able to see that is critical as well.
I like that. So we do have a question about standards. Do you have to follow state standards in order to meet requirements for graduation?
The word follow is something we're going to have to explore here.
Right.
Follow sometimes means, in a public school sense, and I shouldn't go just public school, in some practitioners' minds, that follow means it has a certain order, right? Mm-hmm. That follow means it drives the curriculum. So on that perspective, I will not say that we follow it. However, all of the standards that are part of educational world and educational training are embedded in what we do. If I design a project that's extremely rich, that has a great depth and great complexity, the standards are going to be there. Now I can double check it, I can make sure, but I want to make sure that I design curriculum with the 2E child in mind, that's deep, that's rich, that's complex, that it's at the level it needs to be. If I do that, I'm confident the standards are going to be there. So yes, they're in there, but they're probably not ticked off as a list, and they're not going to be driving the curriculum. The kids drive the curriculum. Their minds, their styles, their intellects, their interests, their passions drive the curriculum. But then the good teachers create curriculum that appeal to the kids, but because it's so rich and so high level, it has to have the standards in it, and it does.
I like that. You mentioned constantly good teachers, and I know that Bridges has amazing teachers. I've been blessed enough to actually have the opportunity to work with some of them. So for our teachers who are watching, what can they do maybe that would help them be able to see the potential in their students? So how should they be looking at their children? So we've talked about the standards, we've talked about what's in the actual curriculum, and you've talked about how the students drive it, but what does a teacher need to be thinking when she is in front of their students?
There are probably a million things that they need to think. But the first one I would implore teachers to do is take their ego out of the game and make sure that they are always asking the question, if this child's getting a low grade in my class, is it the child or is it me? And me is not something personal. Me is not something that you should kill yourself about, knock yourself out, but it is something you have to ask, what could I do differently to bring out the strengths in that child? So don't assume that because the child is getting a C or D, that that's a C or D child. Reverse it. And without beating yourself up, ask yourself, this isn't working to the extent that I think it should be. How could I change what I do? And now if the teacher can get there, then the teacher can go to the next phase. Okay, what do I know about the student? Do I know enough about the student and the way the student learns and what puts the light in the eyes and what energizes them, that I can think about how to put that into the curriculum to meet my standards, if it's a standard driven, or to just to make sure there are a lot of good standards there that will do that, that I could try something different. You know, I think if you do those two steps first, one is question yourself and your own pedagogy, and then learn more about the child and think about, can I be a designer of curriculum, or must I be simply an implementer of an off-the-shelf curriculum? Mm-hmm. If your children are getting C's and D's on a regular basis, I could check to see if more designing is not necessary and less off-the-shelf implementation of someone else's curriculum. You may need help with that. You may need to learn how to do it. You may need permission from your principal to do that. I know in some situations, people are restricted as to what they can teach and how they can teach it to some degree. It varies dramatically across the country and around the world as far as what those restrictions are. But if a teacher can get that kind of permission to explore, then I think that would set you in the right direction. And to be asking the right questions of yourself, of your curriculum, of the student, possibly the parents, to design for that child. If you start there, you're probably going to do better. And there still might be issues, but you're going to do better.
I like it. You mentioned earlier on something about, oops, brain froze. You mentioned also about, why is it gone? It just left. I don't know why it left the building.
You see, that's okay. That happens to kids too. And because it happens to kids, they're not failures for the day. They're actually bright, amazing people with minds that are so exciting and so full that sometimes they get off track.
Yeah.
So it happens. It happens to the best of us.
Oh, good. So
You're in the clear. Now, getting back on track can be a challenge.
That can indeed be a challenge. So I'm going to have a look at one of the other questions that I have. We have, it's really, really funny because I was talking to a 2E student today, earlier on today, who has recently come out as gay. And he was saying to me that he was very, very upset that people keep saying that children cannot determine their gender orientation when they're younger. And he's known for a while, and it's taken him a while to come to terms with that. So what I was wondering was, could you give any insights to how to deal with a 2E student or a gifted student who is experiencing like gender transitions? So I know that we've had students at school who've transitioned, but how do parents deal with that, and what advice can you give to them?
Well, the first thing advice I might give related to the person you were talking to is, let's not all be experts and tell people when and where they became aware of their gender or sexual orientation. Let the child tell you, let the experts tell us, because what we're going to find, and what you do find, is that you have very young students who are very clear, and then you have people that would until their 20s or 30s or maybe even later. Right. So it's going to be different for different people for different reasons, but let's just accept that and not question it. I know a lot of people would like to think that you cannot possibly know your sexual orientation until you're in your 20s, because it feels better. You say, oh my God, we don't want them to be making any decisions about anything until they're out of college. But it's not going to work like that. Right. So that'd be the first thing. Second thing is to really honor where the child is at. You've got to be careful. You don't want to upset the child in any particular way. But remember, we're also talking about children that could be as early as 5th grade or 12th grade. Developmentally, the way we would approach that is very different for different grades. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, you want to try to establish an area of just really openness. Look, we can talk about this thing. It's absolutely fine to talk about it. And if you're confused, confusion's fine. Confusion is that one of those places that when you come out of, you're just wiser. And if someone is upset about it and they don't understand, that's okay too. Let's take where we are and let's move ourselves forward through dialogue and understanding, and that it's all okay. So we want to make sure that in the school environment in particular, but we also want to check in with the home, that there's home support, that there is any other additional supports that might be necessary if a child's having particularly difficult. Some children don't. Some children do not have all the difficulties that we as a school or parents or society think they should have. Why aren't you a mess? You're perfectly, you seem perfect, but you can't be because and it's not true. There are some kids that do not have major issues, but we've got to be there for every one of the kids, and we've got to know that we support them. So we have to make sure that curriculum addresses positive role models for all sorts of students, whether they're gay or transgendered or any other difference has got to be there. But we want to make sure it's an open environment. We want to make sure we have the information we need as teachers and educators about that student and about the population in general, but that student in specific. We want to make sure the home life is a rich and supportive home life. They're not going home and being treated poorly. There have been, I had a student come into my office one time and tell me that I needed to tell his father that he was gay. And I said, well, you sure you don't want to do that? And he says, no, I can't possibly do that. And so I said, well, let me, why don't you, your mother knows? And he said, yes. And I said, well, let me talk to your mother first about how we might approach your father. And so the mom, I said, why don't you ask your mom to come in for a meeting? And she did. She came in, she sat down in the lobby, but her husband was with her. And so I had a weird situation. I said, welcome both of you. Could I speak to you for just a second? And I asked the mother to come in. I said, your son asked me to talk to you about how to talk to the father about him being gay. And she said, well, he's out there. And I said, well, I know that. And so I called the child. I asked for the child to be brought to my office. He was home. He stayed home that day. And so I talked to him at home and I said, your father's here. What am I supposed to do? He says, oh, just take care of it. And I said, yeah, okay, fine. I hung it out, brought him in. But what I did really was, and we were in an odd situation. I said, I want you, the parents and the child, to sit in my office and I want you to talk about it. I said, I don't want this child going home to an environment that is going to be upsetting or hostile or whatever. If there's anything, do it right now. So they were able to talk about a lot of issues. And so I talked to them. I went in after and I said, so you're okay for now? I said, it might not be perfect. Yes. I said, so you're going to be okay at home tonight? So we want to get involved to the extent we can. We can't be involved everywhere. Right. And to the extent that we need to train teachers or train ourselves or get more information on what it means to be transgendered or how to use pronouns and all of that time, it's new in our society. And it's culturally different. And so we need time. And I think if everybody is just open to discussion, open to talking about it, we're going to be in a better place. I was out at pickup this morning, and one of the boys ran over to one of the other students, said, "Are you here? She or they?" And I just was watching the kids talk about that, and thinking how generational it is, right? That because they can talk about it and they can use it and whatever, it doesn't become a big deal for them. It's a big deal for other people, but it really is not a big deal. My great grandmother told me one time she had never, how did she put it? She said, I didn't even know what gay was until I was like 70 years old. And she says, and I'll tell you, by the time you're 70, you really don't care one way or the other. You're not doing anything anyway. So openness, discussion, support at school, knowledge, information, support at home, and then we move forward.
Cool. So, so based on that, then, would you also recommend that parents, so maybe the child tells their parents, but they don't tell the educators. So then should parents come in and talk to either the child's homeroom teacher or their advisor or the principal, so that the school has an insight as to what's going on at home, even if the child doesn't want, because suppose the child doesn't want anybody at school to know yet. How do we deal with that one?
I think it depends on the particular child and the family. I think ultimately the family could try and work with that child to say, I love you, I'm comfortable with you, and I know the kids at the school will be, and I'd love for you to be comfortable in that setting. How can I help you get there?
Nice.
Right. And if I can help you get there, then it's your choice. Right. We want to give people the choice to communicate about themselves to other people and not do it for them if we can. If there's something that's getting in the way, psychologically, or they're depressed, or there's something, then maybe we need to bring in a confidential level, someone at the school that we're watching it. But you'd have to play that by ear with the particular child, the particular family, and what the best approach is for that child.
Nice. So one of the other questions that we had from a parent, they have a 2E teen, and she wants to know how to navigate behavioral aspects related to participation in school due to motivation and lack of a willingness to participate. So don't know the parent personally, so I'm making the assumption that this is probably within a public school rather than a 2E school, but that the child is not motivated or doesn't want to be part of what's going on. So how or what can the parent do to help motivate their child?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is to dig a little deeper. You have to have a working hypothesis as to why something is occurring, why some behavior is occurring. Why you can't just leave the conversation at, well, the child isn't motivated. Well, why are they not motivated? Is it a psychological problem? Is it a neurological problem? Is it a social anxiety issue? What is at the basis of this behavior? You've got to have a working hypothesis. If it's socially, then is it because they're on the spectrum? Is it because they're in a class and there's nothing but boys or girls in the class? Is there someone in the class that they have a crush on, and so that they're not engaging in that class because they're afraid of failure in front of that person that they absolutely love?
Oh, yeah.
You know, you never know. You need to go deeply into understanding and have a working hypothesis so that you can come up then with a plan that you can try. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not. But if it doesn't, then you develop a different working hypothesis and you keep going until you have looked at it. Oftentimes we know it has to do with subject matter. Right? It's not interesting. There are times when there's not enough dopamine, there are not enough chemicals. There is a biochemistry that makes it difficult for the child to be intellectually aroused about something. Okay. Different subjects will make a difference too. I love reading science fiction. I love reading 18th century legal tracts. Give me anything else and I will fall asleep. But give me, for whatever reason, 18th century legal tracts, I will stay up all night.
Oh, wow.
So why is that? I'm not sure why it is. I'm not sure why it would be for kids, but you need to dig deeper. Is it neurological? Is it psychological? Is it medical? Is it sociological? What is at the core of it? And then let's work together to try to change the context in which that child is learning, the environment, in order to allow the child then to awaken and to become aroused about a subject.
I like that. We have another question. It says, what is your approach with kids who check out? So our kid literally has a blank look on his face and stops responding to questions when it's homework time. Uh-oh. I'm curious how an environment like Bridges approaches that. So,
to a great extent, I think I answered that just now by looking at a hypothesis, trying to find a working hypothesis for why that occurs. You want to understand what it is that's shutting the child down. Is the child flooding? Is the child overwhelmed? Is the child insecure? In other words, are they so insecure about their own abilities that they're afraid to take even one step because they believe they're going to fail? So that becomes psychological. Is it that I would want to talk to the psychologist if there is one. I would want to see where it occurs. Sometimes when we have children that are having difficulty, we don't want to just look at them having difficulty. We want to see where are they successful? How are they successful? Even slightly more than what you're talking about, right? Slightly more than what you're talking about, and say, okay, they can be successful in this environment. So maybe we can do something with this environment to make it more like the other one, and the child can improve. Where can they be successful? And what are the variables of that environment that makes that difference? So you need to dig, you need to understand, is it a medical condition? There are certain kinds of petit mal seizures where someone will freeze. There are times when anxiety will just debilitate a child. What is it? And you start there. with asking all the questions, ruling out certain things, and your team and the teachers can try different things to see what can be ruled out. And I think you will eventually come to a place where the child will begin to open up and take steps and create and behave better, or the way you would like to see them behave and engage to some degree. Or you're dealing with something that is extremely serious and is going to take more psychiatric kind of interventions to make it work.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And also, one of my favorites is one of the things that we've also found is to look at what your child's eating, or if they're eating. So there's the TV commercial about, I'm not sure if it's a Snickers bar, when the person's hangry and they turn into like an alien because they haven't eaten. So one of the first things that I always tell parents is to check whether their child is hungry, because we have found that children don't work very well when they're hungry.
We had a student in the 7th grade a few years ago. Her mother came to a team meeting, and we talked about that same thing, that she needed to eat small snacks throughout the entire day, or she would dip and her personality would change a little bit, and she'd be a little aggressive, or she would just back out. And so the mother bought into that immediately. The next day, the teacher came to my office and said, "Carl, you've got to come to my classroom. You've got to come to my classroom." And I said, "Well, I'll be there." Okay, no, Carl, you need to come right now. So I went down, and there was a refrigerator in the classroom full of snacks with a note from the parent saying, "Everybody can enjoy the snacks all day long."
Oh.
Now, this wasn't just a little refrigerator. It was a full-size refrigerator taking up a third of the room. But I had to, so we moved the refrigerator out. We got something smaller in there, and we adjusted. But I really loved the story.
Brilliant.
In that the mother got right on it, and she did it for everybody, and everybody needed snacks, and a little overboard, but the heart and the attention and the effect was there.
Was right.
It was a fun little moment.
But I love that. I love that. So not only for hers, but for the entire community. And I know that Bridges is very much a community and has that whole family feel. And so probably my last question is, there's been some conversation, because Bridges is a strength-based, talent-focused education. And there's that wonderful quote from you about children coming into Bridges defined by their differences or their difficulties, and leaving Bridges defined by their strengths and their talents. However, there is a small group of people that are critical, for want of a better word, of strength-based education. And they seem to think that all that happens is that the children spend all day playing at the stuff that they're good at, and that they don't learn to cope, or they don't learn skills to help them deal with the areas that they struggle. So could you dispel that myth and give us a little more background?
Well, that's what the mute button's for. When these people are talking about that way, hit the mute button, because it's a useless way of looking at it. Look, in K through 12 education, we are responsible for exercising every muscle, right? We are responsible for reading, quantitative thinking, scientific reasoning, every type of activity. We're responsible for listening. So kids learn to listen and process information. We're responsible for creating visuals so students can see and process visual information. We are responsible for it all, and every muscle needs to be exercised constantly in every class. However, that doesn't mean that you can't say, wow, that child has a strength. That child has a strength in, let's say, leadership. Well, I'm going to do a project, and I'm going to let that be the project leader, because he'll be more engaged because he's a natural leader. I had one student one time who I did Model UN, Model United Nations, and we were hungry, and we had to do a lot of research. We had to look at all of the laws that were passed in Hungary in 1950s and 30s and 50s, whatever. We had one boy who was an extraordinary researcher, extraordinary. So he was our research person. That was a strength of his. He could find anything, anywhere, in any database, anywhere in the world, and he could do it within seconds. And so we assigned him to be that. That was a strength of his. But guess what? He knew everything that anyone else knew because he saw it first, he read it first, and he gave it to us first. So did he have to write things out? Absolutely, he had to write. Did he have to communicate that verbally and give presentations to the group? He absolutely did. So he'll practice all of those types of skills. But one of his major tasks in my class was to be the class researcher. So why would I not use that strength? Now, do the others need to learn how to research too? Yes, but they don't need to spend their lives doing it. They need to know how to do it, should they need to do it. We need to exercise it and talk about it, but they will learn how to research in a lot of different contexts throughout the curriculum, throughout the years. But using someone's strengths, whether it's a leadership type strength or it's a particular strength to manipulate databases and research and find different things and cue into keywords and understand how the logic of data is stored in information sciences, why not? So it's really, it is not what you are saying the critics are saying it is. It's just not. If they are saying that happens a lot in education, where people take a concept and they misinterpret it, they fight over it, and then new careers are started as people write books about the positions that never were the positions in the first place, but they are now, and so they create conflict where there is none. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people who misuse strength education, and I'm not strength-based education. I'm not saying that those people don't need to be criticized. Okay. But there's a difference between criticizing a bad practitioner of something than criticizing the theory and the practice itself when practiced by someone who's good at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun, and unfortunately, we are at the end of our time.
I don't have to leave.
But we do have to honor your time, and I know that school's kicking off and you have an awful lot to do. So I cannot thank you enough for joining us. Thank you so much for tuning in to Crucial Conversations on Cognitive Diversity today. And hopefully you'll join us next month. My guest next month will be Dr. Isaac Tides, and he will be talking to us about sleep therapy and superhero therapy. So thank you once again for joining us. You'll get a little poll, a little survey. Please take time to fill that in for us. We really do appreciate your feedback. And if you have any other questions for us, feel free to email us and you'll see the email on our closeout slide. So have a great month. Take care, be safe, and I look forward to seeing you next month. On our closeout slide. So have a great month, take care, be safe, and I look forward to seeing you next month. On our closeout slide. So have a great month, take care, be safe, and I look forward to seeing you next month.